Welcome to another response on my live stream to my cousin. My cousin was asking some questions about Psalm 22,
Okay.
particularly verse 16,
Yeah.
where it talks about they pierced my hands and my feet. It's a prophecy written 1,000 years before Jesus was born by David, as if David is on the cross. I mean, it's as if he's on the cross. It's an amazing prophecy, and I did a live stream about that today, kind of for Thanksgiving, and then I had one of my relatives who's a Muslim, and he says, "No, wait a minute. When it says pierce my hands and my feet, that's not what it means. It means uh, a lion's at my hands and my feet, or like a lion or something." And so I wanted to get someone who speaks Hebrew to respond to him because I don't speak Hebrew, or and I know you're a messianic pastor, and do you actually speak Hebrew?
Uh, Ni medaber katsat ivrit. I speak a little Hebrew.
Okay, all right.
I mean, I'm not fluent. I'm not Israeli, okay, but I speak certain things in Hebrew, and I know some words in Hebrew and stuff like that. I do know Hebrew, okay. So,
Okay. Um, yeah. Could I ask you a little bit about you're a pastor now, a messianic, and what does that mean, messianic?
well, I mean, I'm Jewish. I was raised Jewish, and I became a believer in Yeshua or Yeshua, Jesus, uh, back like 40 something years ago, 43 years ago.
Me
Uh,
too.
so I'm kind of like a rabbi. I'm like a rabbi of a Jewish congregation, but I was not ordained a rabbi by a synagogue. I meant like a yeshiva. So I use the term messianic pastor, but it's like equivalent to a rabbi of a Jewish congregation that believes Yeshua or Jesus is the Messiah. So
Wow.
that's what I do.
I'd love to have you. I'd love to sometime talk more with you about this subject. I know you don't have very much time, but with my cousin's particular objection, he was saying that this word, one word means like a lion, one word means pierced. My hands were pierced, or there's like a lion at my hands and feet and stuff like that. What do you know about this particular situation about Psalm 22, verse 16? And I got the two words here in Hebrew
Yeah, you've got him up there in the consonants of it. So basically, Steve, what it boils down is that um, number one, we need to understand like the Hebrew manuscripts and things like that. So basically, when Hebrew was originally written, I mean, like when this psalm, we call it Tehillim, when Psalm or Tehillim 22 was originally written, it was written just with consonants. Like in English, we have E's, I, O, U, those are all vowels and stuff in words. But back in those days, they just had the consonants, and people knew from the context, oh, okay, it had this kind of a vowel sound and stuff like that. Okay, so all the manuscripts, like I said, just originally had consonants. Now, as time went on, and I'm talking about even after the time of Yeshua or Jesus, 2,000 years ago, as time went on among the Jewish people, they not as many were speaking Hebrew. And then they would say, well, how's this word to be pronounced? They weren't always sure about that. And so around the 9th century or 10th century, there was a group called the Masoretes. And so the Masoretes said, hey, we want to put in vowel pointing so that our Jewish people will know how to pronounce this word. And so they came up with what's called the Masoretic text. Okay, so that in Judaism today, that's kind of considered the authoritative text, is the Masoretic text.
Okay.
Now, they were supposedly trying to put what the original, I mean, that's the key thing, is what's the original, not what they're saying it is, but what was the original. Now, in general, the Masoretic text is a pretty reliable text. However, with manuscripts being copied and copied and copied, and sometimes there were slight differences that could change the meaning of a word, And also, depending on how what vowel pointing you put, that can change the meaning of a word. And that's where it comes in on this Psalm 22, verse 16 that we're dealing with. So since we don't have the original manuscript that David wrote, we're only dealing with a copy of a copy of a copy down the road. And I'm not saying they're not reliable. I mean, the Jews, our Jewish people, were very meticulous in terms of doing that. In fact, here's an example, like the Dead Sea Scrolls. When they discovered those back in I think it was 48 or 49, when they compared like the Isaiah scroll that was in the in the Dead Sea Scrolls, when they compared that to what the Masoretic text, it was almost identical.
Wow.
Which means that it showed God has been preserving the text over the years. So in this case, it's not a problem like there's a problem with the consonants being wrong or anything like that. The consonants are correct. It's just what is the vowel pointing?
Right.
So all right, so going back to what the net issue is. So the real issue is, what was the word that God inspired David to say in Psalm 22, verse 16, that's in question here? What was it? What's in the Masoretic text, which would indicate about like a lion,
Mhm.
and that would be the Hebrew word. Let's see, ka'ari, ka'ari. Let's see. Do you still have the Hebrew
Yes.
up
Yes, I do. Yeah.
on the screen? I'm sorry, I've got part of the screen covered with my notes. Right. So the one, what I'm looking at under my picture, that's ka. No, no, wait a minute. No, wait a minute. Where's ka'ari? I don't I see one of the Hebrew up here. Uh, that's it. That's Ka'ari. Okay, right. So that's Ka'ari right there. So it's, notice the consonants are still the same. It's just this last thing, the yud on the end there. See that would have, and if we were doing a vowel point, we'd have a dot under that resh there, and so that makes a e sound, and that's like, like a lion. Okay, so that's in the Masoretic text. Okay, so here's the question is, so why in the Christian Bibles, if we can say it that way, or Christian translations, why do they not say that? Why are they saying pierced my hands and my feet? So why are they saying that? Where are they getting that from? They're getting that from other evidence which indicates the Masoretic text in this particular case. I'm not saying Masoretic text is a bad manuscript. I'm just saying in this particular case, the Masoretes were mistaken or wrong, or maybe even intentionally vowel pointed it this way because they didn't want it to say they pierced my hands and feet, because that all of a sudden sounds like what happened to Yeshua, him being crucified.
Mm.
So again, we don't know for sure, but it is possible they intentionally vowel pointed it this way, or maybe when they were looking at the evidence back at their time, they said, hey, let's go with this view over here because that's a lot better for our cause and stuff. So again, I don't want to impugn their motives, but I'm just saying that. All right, so let me give, what's the evidence that I believe, and many others believe, that it really is ka'aru, not ka'ari. Ka'aru would would be the Hebrew that would be behind they pierced my hands and my feet. So what's the evidence for that? I'm going to quote Dr. Michael Brown. Now that's not me. He's a brother in the Lord, but he is a real authority
I know
on,
him. He's
I
awesome.
use him as a reference. So I'm going to quote him. This is from his Answering Jewish Objections, Volume 4, 4.25. Okay, so let me quote him. He says, actually, the Septuagint, all right, what is the Septuagint? The Septuagint was a Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures. Back during Yeshua's time, that was their Bible, okay, that they would use. They were, by and large, they weren't using a Hebrew manuscript. They were using the Greek because most of them use Koine Greek. That's what they're speaking. I'm not saying they didn't use Hebrew. Don't mistake me, but I'm just saying that that was kind of like today we have an Old Testament and New Testament in our Bible. Okay, so back in that day, their Old Testament was the Septuagint. That was
Okay.
part of their Bible. Okay, it was the Greek translation of it. That's what they were used to reading. Okay, so let me go back to quote him. Actually, the Septuagint, the oldest existing Jewish translation of the Tanakh, which is the Hebrew Scriptures, was the first to translate the Hebrew as "they pierced my hands and feet." Okay, so in the Septuagint, which was Greek, they used the verb aruxon, and aruxon followed by the Syrian Peshitta. Okay, what the Syriac Peshitta, if I'm remembering correct, that was Aramaic. All right, it was or maybe Syrian, may be different than Aramaic. But anyway, the Syrian Peshitta version, 2 or 3 centuries later, rendering with Bazu. Okay, so I'm not proficient in Syriac. Okay, not only so, but the oldest, now listen to this. Not only so, but the oldest Hebrew copy of the Psalms we possess from the Dead Sea Scrolls, dating to the century before Yeshua. So this is 1,000 years older than the Masoretic text. Reads the verb in this verse as ka'aru,
Wow.
not ka'ari, like a lion.
Wow. That is huge.
It also found in about a dozen medieval Masoretic manuscripts, recognized as the authoritative text in traditional Jewish thought, where instead of ka'ari, found in almost all other Masoretic manuscripts, these texts say either ka'aru or karu.
Oh, wow.
So Hebrew scholars believe this comes from a root meaning to dig out or to bore through.
Okay.
All right, so here's his summary statement. So the oldest Jewish translation we have, okay, the Septuagint, translate they pierced. That's what the Greek word is. The oldest Jewish manuscript from the Dead Sea Scrolls reads ka'aru, which means they pierced or they dug,
Oh,
not ka'ari. And
wow.
several Masoretic manuscripts of, like the medieval time, uh, read ka'aru or karu rather than ka'ari. So his summary is, this is not a Christian fabrication.
Wow. Woo!
He says, I have copies of the manuscript evidence in front of my eyes as I write these words.
Wow.
Okay.
That is
So,
amazing.
so I'm just saying, to me, the evidence is strongly supporting, overwhelming, that the original Hebrew that David wrote was ka'aru, which meant
Peer.
they pierced my hands and my feet. If I can say, in addition to what Dr. Michael Brown said, just reading it in English there, it doesn't make any sense about a lion. Like they lion, what I mean, if you read it and you read through it, what in the world, lion? What are you bringing lion in here? Like a lion is going to bite me or something? I mean, how does that deal with my hands and my feet? So even in context, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, I read one of the rabbinic ways that they translated it was a lion mauled my hands and feet.
Yeah, but I mean, even then, it just doesn't make, to me, I'm just saying, when I've studied it, it just doesn't make any sense in context with
Yeah.
what it's David is using this language, this hyperbola language, to describe the terrible turmoil he was going through from, his oppressors and things like that. God inspired him to actually say, they pierced my hands and my feet. That's what he felt like.
Yeah.
He felt like somebody had pierced his hands and feet. He's not saying that really happened to him, but he felt like it happened to him. But God inspired him to say that because that was a prophecy, a messianic prophecy of what literally would happen to Yeshua, several thousand years later.
Yeah. And another thing I read too is that when he was on the cross, Jesus said, my God, why have you forsaken me?"
I'm sorry, let me correct myself. I said several thousand, 1,000 years later. I'm sorry, excuse me.
Another thing I read is that, the fact that Jesus, when he was on the cross, he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Which is the first line of that Psalm, which indicates that he was telling people, go read this. And it was about him on the cross,
Exactly. He was intentionally quoting scripture there. Actually, it says in the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament, that some misunderstood him and thought he was calling for Elijah, but yeah, he was intentionally quoting that to say, that's the way he felt at that moment. I mean, on a human level, as if the Father had forsaken him. And I mean, the Father had. There was separation between him and the Father for the first time in all of history, and he felt, abandoned, humanly speaking, even though he wasn't spiritually abandoned.
Yes. So, wow, Pastor, thank you so much, man. Really, when my cousin asked me this, it's like, I was impressed. I said, well, that's pretty good, but then I went and found out where he got it. And then I studied it a little bit. And I've also recently, I've started taking some classes, and I've seen some issue, almost the identical issue with Psalm 40, where it says, you've opened my ear. And then Hebrews 10, a body you have prepared for me.
Yeah.
And it's the Septuagint that translates it into a body you prepared for me, which I would love to talk with you about that sometime too. And
well, that's what I'm saying. In any of those cases, when people say, hey, your English translation, they're just putting words in, they're not. It's just they're using the Septuagint. We believe in those cases the Septuagint is a more accurate representation of what the original Hebrew was, the original vowel pointing. In some cases, it might be, there was a letter. They're not sure which letter it was, because the letters may look similar. But yeah, that's kind of like the most common explanation. And when you research it, you can go on the internet many times and you can read, where somebody will lay it out, like Dr. Michael Brown has done, and people like that. So yeah, well, God bless you, Steve, with what you're doing. I pray your cousin will openly consider that the Bible, I'm not going to say it's the Christian Bible, because it's just the Bible. I mean, we're not trying to slant it or anything. We're trying to accurately represent what was actually said by God. And so when we look at that, I hope he or anyone else will consider it is reliable.
Hallelujah.
The Bible, English translation we have, are very reliable. And so I hope that they will seriously consider what it says.
Thank you so much. That's such a blessing and such an honor to have you. And it's such a blessing that you were able to come on right now before I go to work. So thank you so much. Shalom. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving with your family, and God bless you. And I hope to see you soon.